now on view. M&M Leisure Centre, Mildenhall 714095.
A quick reminder now about one or two programme changes tomorrow night, especially if you're following the series Charlie, because part 2 can now be seen at the later time of 9:30. Well, now it's back to tonight on Anglia and the Food War.
The port of Alexandria, Egypt. 12 months ago, it was the scene of an American invasion. A stream of barges ferried back and forth from ships anchored in the bay. Their cargo, flour. Their target, the lucrative Egyptian market. One-third of the entire world's flour trade comes here, 1.5 million tons a year. Traditionally, it's been French flour, but last year the Americans made an offer the Egyptians couldn't refuse. The deal caused uproar in Europe and quiet satisfaction in Washington. The Americans had made their point. If there was to be an agricultural trade war, they had the muscle and the money to grab European markets anywhere, at any time.
How big a war is it going to be? It can be little skirmishes, which, in my opinion, the wheat flour episode was a little skirmish, and beyond that, we really haven't done a whole lot to demonstrate that we're serious. However, we are serious, and if somehow we have to do something for our farmers.
Obviously, the Egyptian market we consider is a traditional market of France.
In Paris, the powerful French milling industry was stunned by the American action. To them, it seemed nothing less than daylight robbery.
Definitely, there was some kind of reaction of an American hold-up, you know, something like happening in the West, in the US West.
A year ago, this flour mill on the edge of Paris had just installed £1 million worth of new equipment to meet growing demand, mainly from Egypt. Within weeks of the American deal, the mill was closed, the workforce laid off, the new machinery silent. Other mills were similarly affected, as this major French industry almost collapsed overnight.
If the Americans continue to trade in this way, obviously it's the entire world market of flour will be totally destabilized, with side effects which may be far-reaching.
Meanwhile, in Cairo, ministers could scarcely believe their luck. American flour power had just reduced their import bill by about $30 million.
There is a kind of healthy competition between the brothers, between the EAC and the States of America.
The fight for the Egyptian flour market highlights the present paradox of plenty. While the United Nations reports that 450 million people around the world are hungry, America and Europe are awash with food. Their biggest problem is how to cut production and get rid of surpluses. The flour deal was just the latest episode in what Americans insist had until then been a very one-sided game of poaching each other's export markets.
The EEC wants to play that kind of game. You know, we've got the tools to play that kind of game. We hope we don't have to do that.
You know, the United States has a reputation for doing nothing over the past few years. Our competitors can do damn near what they want to, and the U.S. sat by idly and really not even raised much of a stink about it.
All I'm saying is I want a little quid for all the quo that's going on.
10 years ago, they were importing poultry. Now they have 35% of the world export market for poultry products. In 1973, they were importing beef and veal. Now they are the largest exporter of beef and veal in the world after Australia, and on and on and on. The American farmer, if there's totally a free international market, as we all know, can beat anyone in terms of efficiency or price. But we are in the midst. Some people say, I don't want us to have a trade war. I don't either. But unfortunately, we are in the middle of one, and I think it is time that our government take some steps to bring people to the negotiating table by showing them what we mean business ourselves. There's a trade war, we're just not shooting back.
The peace and tranquility of the French countryside is deceptive. It hardly looks the sort of place to have triggered off a food war. And yet it's on farms like this where the legendary common market food mountains begin. For years, these have burdened community taxpayers who pay to produce them, pay to store them, and pay to get rid of them. The size of them is almost too large to comprehend. Butter, nearly 1 million tons and rising. Grain, 9 million tons. Beef, almost 500,000 tons. Sugar, 4 million tons, and so it goes on. Meanwhile, across Europe, mountains of surplus fruit and vegetables are dumped in the open and left to rot.
Une gigantesque omelette, voilà les résultats de la bataille rangée.
Breton farmers smash 3 million eggs in a morning just to make a political point.
Leur situation économique est catastrophique. Alors pour ce
In Europe today, few things are valued less than food. And yet it wasn't always so.
The great ports of the United States surge with activity as Marshall Aid cargoes reach the docks. The bustling days of lease lend.
Starting in 1948, the Marshall Aid Plan poured food and machinery into a hungry Europe.
The Marshall Plan is, in effect, lease lend for peace.
The John H. Quick was the first of a whole fleet of American ships to bring food across the Atlantic. The Europeans had enough to eat again, and the American farmer laid the foundations for his future prosperity. But 3 decades later, it would all look very different. By the 1970s, the community began to export food as the first surpluses appeared. By the 1980s, even Britain had become a net exporter of grain. European farmers have been encouraged to produce as much as possible, secure in the knowledge that the government would buy what they themselves couldn't sell. This safety net which supports them is known as the intervention system. Whilst it has certainly succeeded in its aim of making the EEC self-sufficient, it has done so at great cost to the taxpayer. The reason for this is simple. Intervention prices can be anything up to £50 a tonne higher than the world price. So whenever the EEC sells its surplus grain on the world market, it inevitably loses money. These losses, or export restitutions as they're called, are at the heart of the transatlantic food war, because the Americans see them simply as unfair subsidies that are stealing their markets.
Our exports have declined in 3 or 4 years, 3 years in a row. They're 42 billion, dropped on down to 39 billion. And this year they're going to be 35 or 6 billion, and next year they're going to be lower once again. And we are really getting backed into a corner on this question, and it is our opinion that the European community is exporting their trade problems to the rest of the world, and the rest of us are forced to bear the burden of their internal domestic agricultural policies.
Well, he would say that. wouldn't he? That's the answer to that. But if you look
At the European Community headquarters in Brussels, they see things very differently.
so often in this entire negotiation, what you have is a holy war against the common agricultural policy. It's the cliche that rouses the farmers in the United States is you can't have that particular market because it's being taken by heavily subsidized European farmers. Now it's necessary to try to set that record straight. Yes, we've increased our share. Yes, we've increased our exports. Yes, for some products we've become net exporters, but we're still the world's biggest importers of agricultural produce.
The start of this holy war between Europe and America can be clearly dated. January the 11th, 1983. Rich, confident, and expanding, Dallas, Texas couldn't have presented a bigger contrast to American agriculture when 5,000 farmers met here for their annual convention. The principal speaker came with a simple message. He wasn't to blame for their problems.
As every horseman knows, when a horse is really mad, his ears lay straight back on his head. Well, that's about how mad the American farmer is over the unfair trade practices of some of our foreign competitors. I want to say now, and other countries should take notice, we expect fair access to international agricultural markets. We will not give in to protectionist measures, but at the same time, we aren't going to let ourselves be plowed under.
Washington's follow-up to the president's speech was twofold. Abroad, $1 billion was to be made available to win new export markets by offering very cheap credit. And at home, a revolutionary scheme was launched to try and persuade America's farmers to produce less. It was called Payment in Kind, or PIC for short. For every acre a farmer did not grow, he would be given not cash, but grain from government stocks. Within months, no less than 82 million acres had been taken out of production. This is more than the combined land area of the United Kingdom and the Republic of Ireland. It underlined the enormous scale of America's agricultural reserves. Those farmers who had already planted their wheat could qualify for PIC, but they first had to destroy their growing crops.
When you travel across the farm country and you see these crops just being mowed down, from a farmer's point of view, and I'm a farmer, it's difficult to accept it because we like to produce, but at the same time, there's no market for it. There's no place to go with it.
But the cost of PIC, $21 billion so far, hurt more than the Department of Agriculture. The image of the American farmer also suffered.
The mere fact that PIC came into being and the mere fact that so much money was channeled into agriculture through the PIK scheme changes in a sense the nature of the debate. Remember, the debate is that we Americans, I now speak as if I was an American, we Americans are economic men. We don't aid our farmers at all. They produce at the lowest possible costs, therefore they have the right to sell anywhere. Okay? We have tried to say all the time, you may not help your farmers in the way that we help our farmers, but you help your farmers nonetheless. In the actual fact, you help them to about the same extent.
Nowhere is this clearer than in the dairy industry. Like his European counterpart, the American milk producer has amassed mind-boggling surpluses, which the government obligingly buys and puts into store. The man who's masterminded the dairy farmers' fortunes for the last 28 years is Pat Healy. But even he now accepts that there will have to be some changes.
The fact of the matter is, we are producing too much milk. we are probably producing as much milk in surplus as there is milk produced in the British Isles. When the milk is produced, it cannot be dumped on the ground. It goes to a plant and cheese or butter is made from it. The problem lies on the farm. The farmer is producing too much milk.
And what do you tell the farmer?
I tell the farmer, quit.
Much of the American dairy surplus is stored in caves under Kansas City, where hundreds of acres have been carved out of the limestone. A stream of trucks deliver butter, cheese, and powdered milk from all over the country for storage until the great day comes when the politicians can decide what to do with the stuff.
I cannot understand why it is so right and holy for the European community to subsidize its exports, and it becomes a mortal sin when the United States does it. I must hasten to tell you, however, that I do not criticize the European community for doing it. I think the Common Agricultural Policy, which I understand to be the glue that holds the community together, is the business of the community. It is not my business. But in the real world, why the United States wants to be such a shy and backward participant, I cannot understand.
If we were ever forced to the wall on this in the final analysis, we have these large reserves of dairy products, which really we need to sell them. And we're only holding them off the market now in the interest of some kind of a resolution to the dispute.
But John Block's tone of self-restraint has a hollow ring to it in Brussels, where their response has been anything but cool.
Their own behaviour up until 2 or 3 years ago left the impression that they never subsidised exports, that they were always the good guys and we, the community, were always the bad guys. Then what do we find? We find that they sell 200,000 tonnes of butter. Where do they sell it? Do they sell it to Russia? Oh no, oh no, oh no. They wouldn't sell anything with a subsidy to the Soviet Union. They sell it to New Zealand, a country which we all know is greatly in need of butter. And the New Zealanders launder the butter and send it off to the Soviet Union in the form of butter oil. What's happened in recent years is the perception of American behaviour has begun to change. So next year, okay, if problems come back again, they don't come back in the same way. It's not going to be a contrast between lily-white United States behaviour and dirty behaviour from the economic community.
Then, in the middle of this war of words, there appeared a new note of discord.
I can't talk, and I look ridiculous. Now my hair has turned to silver. That's not silver.
If down-home informality is the way to win markets and influence people, the Americans are born with a natural advantage.
I can see her star in heaven, blue eyes crying in the rain.
For the official reception at last year's World Food Conference, agriculture ministers from all over the world found themselves invited not to some smart New York hotel, but to an old-fashioned barbecue on John Block's farm in the Illinois Corn Belt. Their day had begun with a tour of the farm.
Welcome to Block Farms. Welcome to corn and soybean and hog country in the heart of agriculture in the United States. You're looking at some of the most productive land and productive agriculture that we have to offer.
eating and starving. For these countries, the battle for their business between Washington and Brussels is an unexpected bonus. But for the tiny band of food exporters, it's a different story, as they find themselves squeezed in a subsidy war.
US programs of assistance to agriculture look like about $40 billion a year, and the EEC with the CAPs about $20 billion, and probably the 10 nation states also spend an equal amount. So we've got up against two blocks spending something like $40 billion a year in agricultural subsidies and assistance. We just don't have the base to compete with that sort of action.
Yeah, we're very concerned about that because our economies, say ours, both Australia's and Canada's, but we are big exporting countries of agriculture product. We certainly can't compete with the European Community Treasury or the United States Treasury.
I think it's a hell of a way to give cheap wheat to the USSR.
If you need a little help with money, dial 100 and ask for Free Phone Provident. We can help.
There's so much we can do to see you through. We can help. We can help.
Dulux have perfected a completely new kind of emulsion paint for walls and ceilings, called solid emulsion. Dulux solid emulsion won't drip or run, so you end up with all the paint on the ceiling and none of the paint on yourself. To make the job even easier, it comes in its own tray, which you can reseal. Dulux solid emulsion in pure brilliant white. No runs, no drips, and definitely no mess. Solid emulsion, new from Dulux.
Do you suffer from painful joints? Feel frayed at the edges, generally unfit? Then take a Black & Decker Woodworker. You'll look better. You'll gain confidence. You'll find yourself doing things you thought impossible. Yes, woodwork need never get you down, because the new Black & Decker Woodworker cures 99% of all woodworking headaches. The new Black & Decker Electric Woodworker, available now without prescription.
Have you heard about this really different software magazine called Input? It's a weekly course that program by program will help you get the most from your computer, and it's designed specially for many of the leading computers. Input's clear instructions will show you how to use a simple 4-next loop to create clever routines, and week by week will improve your programming skills so you can use your computer both practically and imaginatively. Oh, very clever. Input. Learn to program for fun and the future.
Look what happened when a fixed-head razor met a twin-blade pivot-headed Contour from Gillette. While a fixed-head razor don't always hug the jaw, Contour's pivot head helps keep both blades there for sure. So Contour won the contest, and much more. Contour! Gillette's Contour!
We have vast potential. It's unbelievable. It's incredible. If you took all of farm production capacity, we could provide enough calories to feed the whole world all by ourselves.
And there's no doubt they could. The sheer scale of the Midwestern harvest is difficult for a European to comprehend. Its vastness has also tempted many a Washington politician into delusions of grandeur. 10 years ago, when OPEC first flexed its muscles, the then Secretary of Agriculture coined a phrase which has come back to haunt the wheat belt.
For some while, we've talked about the two superpowers in the world, the United States and the USSR. There is a new dichotomy of power developing. It's petropower on the one hand and agri-power on the other hand.
Enid, Oklahoma, has both. But in these days of an oil glut and a grain surplus, it might be simpler to have neither. Modestly calling itself the wheat capital of the world, Enid boasts the biggest grain elevators in America. They would hold more than 1/10 of the entire British crop. Every June, this quiet little town is transformed as the juggernauts move in from Texas in the south and Kansas in the north. Mile after mile, they line up, waiting to unload at the silos, as traffic in Enid comes to a standstill.
1, 2, 1, 2.
In a normal year, the wheat only stays in Enid for a short time before freight trains haul it down to the Gulf of Mexico, where it's exported to the world. But this year was anything but normal. A few days after the start of harvest, everything stopped. Enid was once again empty and deserted. The reason was not hard to find. The grain stores were so full with the old crop, they just didn't have space for the new, and all because they hadn't been able to export their wheat. For Oklahoma farmers like Lorin Werenberg, harvest couldn't wait for the Enid silos to empty. Storm clouds were threatening his crop, and the combines had to keep moving. An Oklahoma acre produces about a ton of wheat, compared with 3 tons in East Anglia. 8 out of every 10 tons have to be exported, and the farmer only gets the price made on the world market, about 80 pounds a ton, compared with an English farmer's 120 pounds. The crop might be the same, but the economics are oceans apart. The harvest landscape looked different too. Because of the payment-in-kind scheme, only half the acres on the farm were being combined. The other half had been destroyed either with a disc plough or by baling for cattle feed. It had been a desperate solution to a desperate problem.
There's many wheat farmers that have to be in bad financial trouble. There's no question about it. Being an American wheat farmer is a tough business. The PIC program it has to be hard on the natural resources of a country. We've got fertilizer that takes fuel to produce that's gone. We've used machinery to produce a crop that we're disking under. We've used manpower that we're not going to have anything but a disc under crop to account for it. Yes, it has to be somewhat tough on the country in general. We are. The country itself is making a sacrifice, yes. If we don't do something to cut down on the surpluses and to build a market for the American farmer, someday we just won't be able to produce. Either that or the government will have to so heavily subsidize it that the taxpayer just wouldn't be able to stand it. We had the market one time, but our market slipped away from us. And it's a little hard for me as an American farmer to compete with an American farmer or with a farmer in Europe when the European governments are subsidizing their farmers to the extent that they are. If the United States government was subsidizing me to where I was getting $5.50 or $6 a bushel for my wheat, I'd plow up all the pastures and we could really produce wheat in this country. We're not looking for a trade war. We don't want we don't want to do those kinds of things, but we would like to be able to compete on a fair basis with the rest of the world.
And what these farmers forget is that, first of all, they're suffering from a very strong dollar, which makes their product more and more expensive. They forget that at 2 or 3 times in recent history, they have interrupted supplies. In 1973 or whatever it was, they interrupted supplies of soya to the community and to Japan. For political reasons, after the Afghanistan crisis, they interrupted supplies of cereals or extra cereals to the Soviets, and the Soviets punished them for it by not buying their cereals.
The American grain embargo was a product of the tough agri-power approach of the mid-1970s. Then, the world was clamoring for American grain, and Earl Butts's no-nonsense approach sounded almost reasonable.
I'm one who believes that the effective extension of agri-power on the part of nations like Canada and the United States that do have a substantial amount of surplus foods to sell in the world, that I think the extension of that agri-power, properly used, can bring international cooperation, and I think is one of the most, is turning out to be one of the most powerful tools we have in our kit of diplomacy, if we're intelligent enough to use it right.
A few years later, the Russians invaded Afghanistan, and President Carter put the theory into practice.
The 17 million tons of grain ordered by the Soviet Union, in excess of that amount which we are committed to sell, will not be delivered.
But by 1980, the Russians could buy wheat from other countries. The embargo was a disaster for the American grain farmer.
I think there's real reason to believe that our export embargoes have been counterproductive. That is, they have hurt the American farmer more than they have hurt others. It's a kind of reversing the food as a weapon approach that we had intended to use.
In Brussels, the Common Market had been asked to support the embargo, but they found American logic hard to understand.
They stopped selling cereals to Russia throughout after the invasion of Afghanistan. Do they stop sending cereals to Russia? No, they don't quite stop sending cereals to Russia. They still send 8 million tons a year. But they say, but we can do that because we have an agreement. The community doesn't have an agreement, therefore it can't send anything. Next thing, they changed the president, and then they suddenly lift the embargo. Why? Did the Russian troops leave Afghanistan? Did the political circumstances which gave rise to the embargo change? No, it's just that he had made a pledge, an election pledge to the grain growers.
The Kansas City Board of Trade, where the world comes to buy America's wheat. Although the harvest is in full swing, the trading floor is quiet and prices are depressed.
This is Dave. Right on. Well, we're going to be a little lower.
The reason is simple. The wheat belt's best customer is buying elsewhere. In a world full of ironies, few are more poignant than staunchly anti-communist American farmers depending on the Kremlin for their livelihood. Whether it's beef or butter, wheat or wine, the Soviet Union is the winner in the food war, and its ships have never been more welcome in Western ports. Apart from beef, Russia now absorbs a quarter of the world's exports of wheat and butter. If the productivity of their farms ever matched that of the West, today's food mountains would seem like mere molehills. Egypt also has a food problem, but here it's the result of too many people. Their population has doubled in the last 20 years to 45 million. But in the crowded streets of Cairo, there's little sign of any food shortage. The stalls are laden with locally grown fruit and vegetables. Most people, though, exist on a simpler diet, with bread as the staple food. Bread has an almost mystical significance in Egypt. The Arabic word for it, Aish, also means life. In the last 4,000 years, little can have altered in the bakery, except, of course, that today the flour is almost certainly not Egyptian. This is the traditional balada bread. Its price is fixed by the government at 1 piastre. That's less than a penny. This subsidy ensures that everybody eats, but it also means that Egypt will be a major wheat importer for a long time. Butter oil is another surplus commodity that pours into Egypt. They mix it with that other ingredient of the West's food mountains, skimmed milk powder, in this case from Britain. All that need be added is water, and you have a product that's in great demand, milk. Reconstituted in this form, it doesn't taste very different from when it left the cow, possibly years ago. Until the mid-1970s, traditional farming in the Nile Delta produced enough to feed the country. But now, Egypt imports 70% of its food. To try to reverse that trend, irrigation methods are being brought up to date. Now, even the desert can be made to bloom. This is the very latest American technology. Huge mobile arches sweep automatically around a central pivot, raining water onto the growing crops. This project is part of an ambitious government program to create 1 million acres in the next 7 years. In theory, that would be enough to bring Egypt's food trade back into balance.
It is a big project. You couldn't imagine.
Hussein Ahmed Osman is one of the men behind the scheme.
You know, now we pay for food from abroad more than 3 billion. It may be after 7 years, 10 billion pounds, because food price is increasing, and we in Egypt, our people are increasing all day. That's why if buys after some time, if we can get the money to buy, we may not find the food to buy it. And also, if we have no money, then we shall not eat. It is essential and strategy, and we should make it. And it will be more than the weapons. You know, food in all the world, after some time, it will be more than the weapons, more important.
Egypt considers her aim of food independence from the West to be a political necessity. Whether it's attainable remains to be seen. High-technology farming on these desert soils has yet to prove itself. But it's difficult to avoid comparing this costly effort to create 1 million acres with America's casual discarding of 82 million acres. Egypt can at least afford to buy food. But what about those countries who can't? Southern Africa, for instance, is enduring one of its worst droughts in history. Harrowing pictures of hungry children sit uncomfortably alongside stories of wasteful food mountains.
I think the United States and Europe, we sit down and we wring our hands together, and we don't know for sure how to get the surpluses that we both have into the hands of the needy. Who's going to pay for it? Who's going to ensure that we don't disrupt their local economy and result in a disincentive for their farmers to raise anything and end up with all kinds of worldwide complaints and backlashes.
The surpluses, as far as food aid is concerned, are irrelevant, except in some cases of emergency.
Oxfam has been in the forefront of the argument about food aid.
Well, the butter is complete nonsense, and in fact is not sent as food aid anyway. The milk powder can be positively dangerous and is generally irrelevant in most countries at most times. The wheat has some use at certain times. If there is a real emergency, you want to get something in, and wheat is what we have as surplus stock. But we have to be very careful. Africa, as a continent, produces very little wheat, and what is happening, not just with the food aid, but with the commercial sales of wheat, is that they're becoming more and more dependent on us to grow wheat, rather than concentrating on growing their own food.
So with outlets for surplus food in the Third World limited, Europe and America are now looking at their trade with each other. The EEC has a £6 billion deficit in agricultural trade with the United States, largely caused by huge imports of soya beans and maize. Some of these could be replaced by surplus grain, a situation that the EEC plans to make the most of.
We are the United States' biggest customer. So quite clearly, any trade war that led the community to think twice about whether it wanted to go on importing so much agricultural produce from the United States would hurt the Americans just as much as any trade war would hurt us. There's no certainty in all of this. No one's going to win and no one's going to lose. If there's a trade war, and this is something that we say repeatedly to the United States, if there's a trade war, we will lose, you will lose. Therefore, the interest is to look at the figures, be objective, and try to work things out.
I just would not want the European community to think that we're in a weak position, because we really aren't in a weak position here. I think that we have every bit as much determination and as many tools at our disposal in competing for world markets as the community has.
American negotiations are handled by the less hawkish State Department, where the two sides regularly confront one another.
I'm always optimistic, by definition.
The Europeans are led by the Commission's ever-cheerful Director General, Claude Villien.
Good morning, how are you? Thank you. Welcome.
The atmosphere is relaxed and informal as the American hosts try to defuse the situation.
Welcome to friendly Washington.
Yeah, thank you. So we will two pipe smokers.
Yes, yes. And I'm ignoring those no smoking signs. Just ignore them.
The State Department feels it has enough problems in Europe without getting drawn into an agricultural trade war.
I hear that you have no vacations for the first time in recorded memory in Europe.
But at the back of everyone's minds is the fear that the dispute is almost certain to get worse this year, since neither side seems able to stem the flow of food from their farms. In Europe, the picture is especially bleak, and with bankruptcies staring it in the face, the Commission has been desperately trying to get its message across.
What makes agriculture different from the rest of the economy? Why is it that you ask the steel sector to take strain? Why is it that you may ask the coal sector to take strain? Why is it that you ask industry to take strain and that you say to the agricultural sector, you are different. You can go on producing things which no one wants, and we will give more and more taxpayers' money in order that you can dispose of it conveniently.
But while the Commission proposes, next door on the top floor of the Charlemagne building, the Council of Ministers disposes. The talk may sound tough, and the proposals far-reaching, but few observers expect them to have great impact on the food mountains. As ministers like Michel Rocard know too well, it's one thing to make decisions. It's quite another to sell them to the farmers back home. The sort of price cuts necessary to eliminate the surpluses would simply be unacceptable to Europe's militant farmers. It will be hard enough to deliver even the present fairly modest proposals. But hovering over the internal wrangle of the CAP is the American factor. This is election year, and no president is going to do anything to upset the all-important farm vote. Already, modest Congress proposals to cut the price of milk have been rejected. Meanwhile, the caves under Kansas City keep on filling. The giant grain elevators in Enid are still packed with wheat. American carryover stocks at the start of this year's harvest will stand at an all-time high. Out on the prairies, a time bomb is ticking away as the American grain farmer goes back into production. Only two things, it seems, can prevent the food war getting worse: a dramatic upturn in world trade or a massive drought. There are long odds against either.
Some programme changes for Wednesday night here on Anglia. At the earlier time of 7:10, drama down Coronation Street.
I would like you to come straight up.
Why?
Why?
Why me?
At 7:40, exclusive coverage of the Milk Cup final replay, with Merseyside giants Liverpool and Everton clashing again after Sunday's draw. At 9:30, the pressure's on for David Warner as Private Eye Charlie Alexander fighting for the truth.
Relax, can't you? No one's trying to kill you for days.
With Crossroads at 6:15, This Is Your Life at 6:40, and later professional boxing at 11, these are the revised programme times for Wednesday night here on Anglia.
Back to tonight now, and in a moment, a tale of Nazi terror in The Mysteries of Edgar Wallace.
ESP is when you feel it before it happens. Now, ESP is extrasensory perfume spray from Yardley. You sensed it, and you knew the perfume would be you.
You're going to follow him, Jim? You're taking this one going the other way? Sadiq? Yep. You taking this one going the other way? Yep. Right.
Taylor, because it's a nice shot.
Yep, just warming up, whatever it's called.
Looks like. Yeah. Hey, take one. Right, nice and steady, everybody. Just on the tractor.
tell me when you're ready.
Okay, I've got to put them on. Did they come on today?
They will come on. I haven't got them on as yet.
Oh, sorry, go on, sorry, keep going, sorry, I'll put it down.
Try that again.
Yeah.
Without asking to keep it right.
Can you do it at arm's length so that I can see your head? Stop.
Yeah.
If you stretch them, put them
All
on
right.
again.
Do you want me to eliminate them there?
Put them out again, you can. Can you do it without, yeah, can you do it like stretching them?
Yeah.
Okay, when you can. Off you go. Yeah, good idea. No. Can you do it on the other side? Can you do it from over here?
Yeah.
Once you've got them on, move across the shop.
All right.
You start over here, put them on, wait a couple of seconds, then walk across to the other side. Yeah? Okay, and again, in your own time.
Turn that one off.
Can you
just turned on.
that big knob there, big red thing, whatever it was. Yeah, that's it, great. Can you turn it on for us again? Any more around that area?
And turn these off.
What about these buttons down here again, the very first ones you pressed?
I can eliminate them.
Yeah, those there. And again? Great, thank you much indeed.
It's all right.
Lovely. that folder off there. How's it sound?
Okay, Jim.
It's whistling at you.
Yes. Tells me.
Whistling.
It's telling me that I ought to stop and change batteries. Okay?